I want to turn our attention, though, now to the appalling anti-Israeli chant from a couple of musicians, but one in particular, at the Glastonbury Music Festival in the UK at the weekend. Now, this involved someone I'd never heard of, a rap duo called Bobby Vilan, had the crowd in the ugly chorus during a set broadcast live by the BBC chanting this. Have a listen.
Death, death to the IDF, death, death to the IDF, death, death to the IDF. Death.
I'm sure you didn't miss it, but if you did, this bloke is encouraging the audience to chant death to the IDF, the Israeli Defence Force, a reference, of course, to the Israeli military and brave soldiers who are wearing that uniform. It's worth remembering that on October 7, Hamas terrorists murdered hundreds of people at the Nova Music Festival. Yet here we have somebody on stage leading a chant at a music festival less than 2 years later, effectively honouring the terrorists. Joining me now to discuss this and more is President of the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, Daniel Aghion. Daniel, welcome. Let's talk about this chant, but I mean, we come to expect some of this disgraceful stuff from entertainers and celebrities. What worries me more about this is the fact that the crowd, which is, I've never been to Glastonbury, but tickets would be expensive. They're largely privileged Londoners, young people. How frightening is it for you personally when you see them join in a chant like that, given what we're going through?
Steve, it's very frightening. That chant then became an echo because it was repeated at the pro-Gaza protests in Melbourne this Sunday. So it's gone around the world and it's gone local here. That's the frightening thing about it. When you hear that phrase, globalise the intifada, this is what we're talking about. This is the consequence of globalisation of the intifada.
I saw a media commentator on with Danica in the program before we came on air, and I thought he made a great point that Britain has not seen this level of anti-Semitism since the 1930s. You'd agree with that, wouldn't you?
Oh, of course. In fact, it's a terrible thing that when you speak to Holocaust survivors in any Western country, doesn't matter which, they will all say that the present level of anti-Semitism is the worst they have seen since the Holocaust. And that's a terrible thing. When a Holocaust survivor says that, for example, here in Melbourne or in Sydney or others that I've spoken to around the world, I have to say, Steve, my heart breaks. It really does.
And you mentioned that this has gone around the world already, and did you say it was being chanted at a protest, a pro-Palestinian protest in Melbourne on the weekend, on Sunday?
That's correct, on Sunday. The only change was instead of calling them the IDF, Israel Defence Forces, they call them the IOF, Israel Occupation Forces. So in Melbourne, the chant was death to the IOF, but it was identical and it was driven by this smart-ass chant, which was delivered at Glastonbury.
And of course, you know, we would have found out about it, but it was made so much worse by the fact that the BBC, somebody in the BBC who needs to be sacked, allowed this to go out live. I mean, they hadn't vetted the lyrics of this rap artist's song. If they had, he would have probably refused to perform, which would have been good for all of us. But, I mean, mainstream media like the BBC, are they just blind to the anti-Semitic rant that this bloke was going on with?
I think the problem, Steve, is that you have to push them into the corner. So there had been another band called Kneecap. I hadn't heard of them either, but they were a rap band, and they're one of their members is facing terrorism charges for waving around a Hamas flag. So the BBC were cautious in respect of that performance and didn't show it live. But then you saw how many pro-Palestinian flags were in the audience. I don't understand why the BBC showed it live, why they didn't put on the 3 or 5 second delay, why they didn't have the usual censorship arrangements in place that they would have for offensive language, for any kind of hateful or vilifying behaviour. Somehow this one is just seemed to just go straight through to the keeper and broadcast live with no problems.
Daniel, I mean, a hard question. You must have, since October 7, turned over and over and over in your mind. What is it about a section of young Western teenagers and younger people in their 20s that somehow drags them out on the street to wave Palestinian flags and chant slogans like this? I mean, what's driving this?
Yeah, look, it's a very good question, Steve. I mean, it's interesting. You know, my father protested against the Vietnam War. He tells me in the late '60s. I think young people, you know, they like to protest, but what's happening is this: they're learning a particular narrative, particularly in the universities. But they're learning a particular narrative that every conflict around the world is not grey, it's not complex, it's not difficult. It's black and white, and it's coloniser versus colonised. And in their eyes, Israel, they're the colonisers, they're the bad guys. The Gazans, the Palestinians, they're the good guys. So it's, you know, it's like Star Wars, the baddies and the goodies. And Israel is the baddies, therefore the Jews, the Jewish state. So the Jews around the world, they're the baddies. And it's that simple and that simplistic. And the trouble then is that this is not a peaceful movement. This is not a movement for positive change. This is not a movement to bring people together. It's a movement to divide, and it's a movement that has hate at its core.
Yeah, it's very, very frightening. Daniel, thank you very much for that, for joining us. We'll catch up soon.